You know, people have a lot of reasons and excuses for their decision to reject God. If you go to school or you work with people that don't know Jesus, you've heard a lot of them. If you aren't sure about God, these might even represent your way of thinking. Well, I don't need God. I'm doing just fine. I'm going to make time for God later. Right now, I'll do my own thing. Christianity is too restrictive. I don't buy into that only one way to heaven. I think there have to be other ways. If I become a Christian, I'll have to give up too many things. I want to have fun. I can't believe a loving God would send people to hell. Who wants to serve a God like that? If God really loved people, then everyone would go to heaven. People have a lot of questions and doubts and misunderstandings about God, but I think this is the biggest one of them all. This is the question people who don't know Jesus wrestle with. And to be honest, this is the question people that do know Jesus wrestle with. It's a tough one that preachers generally try to avoid because it's not easy or popular. Why do bad things happen to good people? And people have questions like, why did my wife get cancer? She's been a Christian her entire life. Why her? How could God let my child die after all I've done for him? She's a good lady. Why did God let her lose her husband? Why did I lose my job? How could God let this happen? Why didn't he stop it somehow? Why do bad things happen to good people? And because they aren't sure the answer, people are filled with resentment, bitterness, and anger. They blame God, and they say things like, if this is what I get for loving and serving God and giving my time and money, then I'm not sure I want to do this anymore. All the things people tell you and all the Christian cliches they spew out in those situations don't help. In fact, most of the time they make it worse. You've heard them. Well, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Well, a bullet in your arm doesn't make you stronger. Or it's always darkest just before the dawn. That's bad science. This too shall pass. The only time that's encouraging is if they have a kidney stone. Or they'll look and say, well, this builds character. I've got all the character I want. Thank you very much. People use those cliches because they're not sure the answer. They don't know what to say. Why do bad things happen to good people? Is it reasonable to expect if you love God, pray, treat people right, and give your money, that things will go right? That you'll be employed, healthy, happy, blessed, that you'll be healthy to 85 and then die in your sleep and go to heaven? If bad things happen, why? What's going on? Is there some other agenda at work? Well, I want to look with you at a moment in the life of a guy in the Bible named Joseph. Even if you've never read the Bible, you've probably heard of Joseph because of a movie or a Broadway show. If you've heard the story 100 times, or if you've never heard it, I'm going to give you a real quick overview. I encourage you to go back, read it all, starting in Genesis 37. It's a great story. Joseph was his father's favorite son. He had a beautiful, colorful coat, a gift from his father to prove it. And as you might imagine, his brothers didn't like that. Then Joseph had two dreams where his brothers bowed down and served him. In a not very wise moment, Joseph shared the dreams with his brothers, who then really didn't like him. They grew to hate him. Joseph's brothers couldn't forgive him or even tolerate him. So one day, while out taking care of the cattle, they decided to kill him. They tore off the stupid coat and they threw Joseph in a well. And then in a last second, not really so merciful decision, they decided instead of killing Joseph, they'd sell him. They trafficked their own brother. Joseph was sold, resold, ended up a slave in Egypt. From there, life was a roller coaster. Joseph was a faithful, trusted servant. He climbed the organizational ladder and ended up in charge of the household of a guy named Potiphar, a high official. But Potiphar's wife falsely accused Joseph of trying to seduce her. Potiphar got mad. Joseph was thrown in prison for several years. Well, in prison, Joseph had a lot of time to think about his brothers, what they'd done. I can only imagine how he must have fought anger, bitterness, and the desire for revenge. Through a miraculous set of circumstances, Joseph was released from prison, and at age 30 was elevated to the number 2 guy in the nation of Egypt, the most powerful country in the world. Joseph's journey from being sold to being a national leader took 13 years. You read it in a few chapters, it was 13 years. Joseph had a plan to store food during abundant years. It positioned Egypt to be the only nation in the world with food during a famine. Joseph's dream of his brothers bowing before him came true. They came to Egypt to ask for food, and they didn't know the guy they were asking, who held their fate in his hands, was Joseph. They didn't recognize their own brother. Joseph didn't tell them who he was. He gave them food and sent them home, but he kept one brother as kind of a ransom so they would come back and prove they weren't spies. Finally, the brothers came before Joseph again, pleading for food and for the release of their younger brother. They still didn't know the person they were asking for help was the brother that they sold into slavery. And this was Joseph's chance to get even. But instead of punishing his brothers, Joseph chose to forgive. Now, that was a really quick recounting. I want to slow down and go through all the bad things that happened to Joseph. It's important to know Joseph served God, loved God, pleased God. In fact, repeatedly in the story, you hear this line, the Lord was with Joseph. God gave Joseph a dream. Everyone he shared it with hated him. Joseph was beat up by his brothers, and his prized possession, gift from his father, was destroyed. Joseph was thrown in an empty well and left there to die. Joseph was sold as a slave. Joseph was sold again to the enemy. Joseph was separated from his family. His father thought he was dead. Joseph was betrayed by his brothers. Joseph was falsely accused of trying to seduce his boss's wife and thrown into prison. In prison, Joseph made friends who promised when they were released, they'd get him released. And when they got out, they forgot him. And Joseph spent 2 more years in an Egyptian prison. No friends, no family, no hope. If there was ever a guy with the right to be angry and bitter with God, it was Joseph. Even though he was a good guy who loved God, bad things kept happening. And one day, Joseph decided enough is enough. He stepped outside. He shook his fist at God, and he made an angry declaration. He said, "That's it. No more. I won't love you. I won't serve you. If this is what following God gets me, I'm done. I'm a good person, and bad things keep happening. I'm through with you, God." Well, that's what you expect. And on some level, you wouldn't blame Joseph. After all, he had it pretty bad, but that's not what Joseph said or did. Instead, Joseph's powerful response provides us with a glimpse, a clue into the answer of life's most difficult question: why do bad things happen to good people? When your world is crashing in, when bad things seem to be piling up and you're wondering, why me? This story and Joseph's words will help you have a completely different perspective. When Joseph finally revealed his true identity to his brothers, they were frightened. They thought he was going to have them killed or put in prison. It was time to get even. Instead, Joseph revealed unusual insight into everything bad that happened to him. Apparently, during all those years of slavery, captivity, and prison, Joseph had considered the question, why does this keep happening to me? We pick up the story, Genesis 45, verse 4. Joseph talking to his brothers. Here's what he says. "And now, do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourself for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you." Wait a second, God sent me? God didn't send him. His brothers sold him. But that's no longer how Joseph saw it. For 2 years now, there's been famine in the land. For the next 5 years, there will not be plowing or reaping, but God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, to save your lives by a great deliverance. And there it is again. God sent me. Instead of you sold me to get rid of me, he says, God sent me here to save your life. Verse 8, so then, it was not you who sent me here, but God. Isn't that unbelievable? For the third time, Joseph said, it wasn't you who sent me here. I was mad. It looked bad. It didn't look fair. But now on this side of things, looking back, I can see it wasn't you who put me here. God put me here. You could look at all the bad things that happened to Joseph and reasonably decide his brothers did it to him. Potiphar's wife was responsible. The Egyptians did it. That's kind of your natural assumption when things go wrong. It's an attack of the enemy. You think things like, there's no way I can survive this. Where is God when I need him? How am I ever going to make it? Why is God allowing this? Why do bad things happen to good people? Joseph says, God did it. He made me father to Pharaoh, Lord of his entire household, and ruler of all Egypt. God sent me here for a purpose, to save your life and to rule. Hey guys, you remember that dream? The one where you bowed down to me? You didn't know it. But when you sold me as a slave, that was part of it. That was the beginning of the dream. That was the beginning of God's plan for my life coming true. Now, hurry back to my father and say to him, this is what your son Joseph says. God has made me Lord over all Egypt. For the fourth time, Joseph said it. God did this. Tell Dad, God was behind it. He sent me here for a purpose. He made me a ruler. You make sure and tell Dad so Dad doesn't blame you. And now flip forward 5 chapters. Genesis 50. Their father's dead. The brothers are afraid again. Now that Dad's gone, they expect Joseph will finally get his revenge and get even. And Joseph calmed them by saying, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what's now being done, the saving of many lives. So don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children. Wow. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. Beaten up, thrown in a well, sold again, falsely accused, put in prison, isolated, alone. God intended all that for good. He sent me here. He put me here to save you and to save others. And you say, okay, Rod, thanks a lot. I get it. So the reason God lets bad things happen to good people is so other people can be saved. So are you trying to tell me that everything bad that happens to me is God's design? Now I really don't want to serve him. What kind of God is that? Look again at Joseph's words. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. God didn't intend evil for Joseph. What God did was take the evil intent of others and turn it in such a way as to position Joseph for impact and blessing. God took what looked like and seemed like a really bad series of circumstances, and he used them to make Joseph's dream come true. And that brings us back to today's promise. When you leave today, the ushers have a card for you with this promise on it. Paul wrote, Romans 8:28, we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who've been called according to his purpose. New American Standard Version says it this way. We know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. Do you believe that? Okay, you're not sure. Paul said, in all things, that's good things, bad things, evil things, unfair things, horrible things, and great things. In all things, God works for the good of those who love him. Bad things happen to good people and bad people and God's people. That's part of life on this earth. No one is immune from sickness, heartache, or trouble. But those who love God have a promise that when bad things happen, God will use it and God will turn it for your good and for the good of others. Even when it seems like life is spinning out of control, God is still working. God is working behind the scenes. He is orchestrating things on your behalf. And you say, well, Rod, what about death? What about when a good person dies before their time? We get fairly short-sighted when it comes to death. Because the whole point of living for Jesus is to go to heaven. When we die, we win. Paul said to live is Christ, to die is gain. We mourn and grieve, but trust me, your loved one is not mourning and grieving in heaven. They aren't asking, God, why did you let this happen? They are singing and dancing and worshiping and praising in the presence of Jesus. And one day soon, we'll be there too. Why do bad things happen to good people? Because bad things happen in a bad, sin-filled, evil world to good people and bad people. The difference is God ultimately uses the bad things that happen to you to bring about good for you and for others. So, did God cause the bad? Absolutely not. But God will use what enemies and the enemy try to use to destroy you and turn it around for good in a way you could never imagine. In life's great challenges and in life's minor inconveniences, God is working for those who love Him. Well, I was in my office working on this message. I got an email from a friend. I've been in her life since she was a child, and I'd never heard this story. And it illustrates this promise so beautifully. I have a condition called hyperhidrosis. It's not dangerous at all unless you get dehydrated. Basically, it's overactive sweat glands, usually relegated to a certain part or parts of the body. The palms, soles, and armpits are most common. Mine's pretty severe. I've been to dermatologists, tried everything shy of surgery to correct it, to no avail. As I said, it's not dangerous, just embarrassing. As a kid, playing Red Rover or hand clapping games is mortifying. Dating was hard because I had to explain why I dislike holding hands. Meeting new people used to cause me anxiety due to our obnoxious American tradition of shaking hands. Why can't we just be weird and air kiss like the Europeans? I'm often unable to lay my hand against papers I'm writing or signing as it'll leave a print. You get the gist. I used to pray fervently, begging God would take this away. It should be so easy. I'm not maimed or disfigured. I don't have cancer. But as I prayed and nothing happened, I figured there must be some sneaky God plan in place. Fast forward to 2017 when our son was born. I chose to breastfeed him and pump while we were apart. Apparently, he had a remarkably abundant milk supply, like to the point our freezer, my mom's freezer, and a second freezer we bought just for milk were all full. Finally, I discovered a milk bank in Texas that takes donations for medically fragile infants who, for whatever reason, prematurity, genetic defect, etc., can't take formula. Some of their mothers can't produce milk or can't make enough or quit pumping before they realize the issue. So with all my excess, I was able to help out. Fast forward again to 2019 with our daughter. Everyone warned me my second time around, the milk supply was different. I may not have such bounty. Nope, same thing. So I reached out to the milk bank much sooner. But this time curiosity got the better of me, and I started researching why I'm blessed. The very first sentence in the anatomy book I consulted said, mammary glands are modified sweat glands, and it all kicked into place. If I had overactive sweat glands, it stood to reason I'd have overactive mammary glands. But that's such a positive thing. And now I want you to listen to her conclusion. She had no idea what message I was working on. So, would God allow me to suffer a minor inconvenience of embarrassment for years before understanding the gift I'd been given? I think so. Now as a mother, I can think of no greater honor than to be able to help other mothers feed their vulnerable babies. Maybe it's just postpartum hormones, but I started tearing up, thanking God for not answering my prayers all those years ago, or I might not have this opportunity now. I just wanted to share another example of how God works in great, mysterious ways. It really is true. God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God and are called according to his purpose. Many of you have heard me share Cindy's story. 2014, the week of Thanksgiving, she had sudden and unexplained kidney failure. It was really frightening. They called me from the doctor's office and said, we're sending Cindy to the hospital. In fact, the nurse said the doctor told me to follow her to make sure she gets there. We're admitting her to ICU. Cindy's numbers were very frightening. It was tense, nervous time. The doctors didn't know what would happen. Cindy spent the rest of that week and Thanksgiving weekend in the hospital. They checked her level every 2 hours for the next 4 or 5 days, and we spent a lot of time in prayer. Many of you prayed with us. For 3 months, Cindy had to live with a catheter and continual trips to the doctor. We canceled trips and plans and a much-needed week of rest. We had no choice. At the time, it was incredibly difficult to understand. We asked why, but there was no answer from God. Heaven was silence. It didn't make sense. It didn't seem fair. We just struggled and wondered. During that time, a doctor in our church connected us with a wonderful urologist, Dr. Gail Jones, a committed believer who loves us. And after Cindy finally got better, we discovered Gail is also ultra cautious. She scheduled regular tests to watch Cindy and make sure everything was okay. Even though it was 2.5 years later, Dr. Jones still ran scans every 6 weeks. On Friday, March 31st, 2017, one of those routine borderline OCD tests revealed a very small tumor on Cindy's kidney. Without those scans, it's likely that tumor would have grown unnoticed for months, maybe longer. Instead, it was caught early, what was very, very small, the size of an eraser on a pencil. And then in the rearview mirror, we understood what we couldn't understand 3 years ago. God, who knows all things, put us exactly where we needed to be. He put us with the right doctor at the right time. God spoke to that heart of that doctor and caused her to be incredibly cautious and a high standard of care and watchfulness. See, if the renal failure had never happened, we never would have been with Dr. Jones, and the tumor would have grown unchecked. And it appears that all things really did work together for our good. After Cindy's kidney failure and cancer, looking back to see how God worked, we see how God worked in it all. Growing up, we sang a simple little song in church. It didn't mean a lot to me then. It was just a chorus. But it means a lot to me now. It just went like this: God is so good. God is so good. God is so good. He's so good to me. Would you sing it with us? God is so good. You're a good God. God is so good. Thank you, Jesus. God is so good. He's so good to me. How many times have you faced trouble or hardship and wondered, where's God in this? How could a loving God allow this? How could God let this happen to me? One day, what doesn't make sense now will make perfect sense. And you'll discover all along that God was working and God was orchestrating things you couldn't see. You say, so Rod, are you saying you believe God caused Cindy's renal failure? I'm not saying that. That might have been an attack from Satan. It sure felt like it. It might have been a natural result of living in a sick-filled world, but regardless of what it was or where it came from, God used it. I put a sticker sheet in your bulletin today because I just want you to put them somewhere to remind you that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God and are called according to his purpose. We made a t-shirt just for this message. I love this one. The front just says, all things. Everybody's going to wonder about that. On the back it says, God is still working. Amen. Even when you can't see it or you can't sense it, God is still working. Now, one more time, Joseph's words. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what's now being done, the saving of many lives. How was Joseph able to say that? Because years later, Joseph had the benefit of hindsight. Looking back, he could see God was positioning me to save you. God used the bad you did to me to put me in a place where I could save you. Joseph reinterpreted his difficult circumstances in light of where he was now, and he realized all that time God was in control. He was still working. Even when you tried to destroy me, that didn't stop God's plan. What an amazing perspective. You tried to do evil to me. You tried to kill me. God's response to that evil was to leverage it and put me in a place to save you. God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God and are called according to his purpose. It's wrong to see Paul's intent in this verse as just it will all work out in the end. It's the opposite of that. It's not random. It's not just trying to make sense of a bad situation. It is the directed purpose of God who will use everything in your life for good. Even the most evil, horrible thing, God is going to turn it around. Amen. I said it earlier. Bad things happen to good people and bad people and God's people. The difference is how you respond. Here's a really powerful way to apply this promise. When you're facing really, really bad things, or even just little things like missed flights and flat tires and sick kids and mean people, trust God's promises more than your perspective. Some of you are on an emotional roller coaster, moving from crisis to crisis, each one knocking you down. Others of you give up on a regular basis. I know that because I read your Facebook page. When the next bad things come, you're ready to quit on God and church. You swing from hopelessness in a moment. And the Lord would say to you today, trust me, I'm working for your good. I know it looks bad. Hey, it is bad. But don't give up. Don't give in. Don't quit. You may not be able to see it right now, but I am working. And what the enemy intends for bad, I'm going to take it and I'm going to turn it for your good. You are not defeated and you cannot be defeated because I, your God, am working on your behalf. Get your hopes up. Trust me and watch and see how I will use this for your good and for my glory. God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. Would you bow your heads with me? And if you're currently in a situation that seems bad and is bad, I want to pray for you. Here's how we're going to pray. We're going to pray this promise over you, and that your perspective will change and your spiritual eyes will open to the possibility that God is going to turn this for his good. And if this is an attack from the enemy, we're going to pray that God frustrates the enemy and turns it in such a way as to protect you and to bless you and advance his kingdom. If you're facing difficulty right now, I want you to stand. We're going to pray. Do it fast. If you're watching online, just hit the button at the bottom of your screen or enter in the text. We got people there. We're going to pray with you. Somebody near you is standing. I want you to stand with them. We're going to pray together. The family of God, We're going to pray this promise over you today. Come on, people stand with you are going to pray. I'm going to pray. God, we believe your word that you cause all things to work together for good to those who love God and those who are called according to your purpose. And so we stand in your presence today, knowing, first of all, that we are loved by you, and second, we're called by you. So we fit the criteria. And God, I pray that you would begin to change our perspective, and we would be able to see that what the enemy intends for bad, what people intend for bad, what looks and feels horrible and wrong and mean and ugly, that God, you're going to take that and you're going to turn it and you're going to use it for your glory. You're going to use that, Lord, in ways we can never imagine. I pray right now that you would frustrate the plans of the enemy. I pray that you would frustrate people who've come against your people. And I pray you would allow us to see things from a new perspective, from a new angle, trusting your word and trusting that you are the God that causes all things to work together for good to those who love God and are called according to his purpose. So, Lord, we choose to rejoice in spite of our circumstances. We choose to trust in spite of how it looks. We choose to praise you in spite of how it seems. We choose to love you. We will not give up. We will not walk away. We will not quit. Lord, in our questions and our doubts, we come to you and we find confidence in your promises. You didn't just say some things. You didn't say occasionally. You said all things. And so we pray right now. We pray for your people, God, that in this current difficulty, in this current circumstance, they begin to see you at work. Lord, you work all things for our good. And our hope and our trust is in you. In Jesus' name. In Jesus' name.